They tell you the world is stable. They tell you the system endures because it is natural, inevitable, eternal. They tell you that the crises you endure are accidents, that inequality is unfortunate but unavoidable, that power rests where it must. This is the first and greatest lie of our age. What they call stability is merely the temporary stillness of exploitation. What they call order is the disciplined suffering of the many for the comfort of the few. Beneath the polished surface of markets and institutions, the world trembles with contradiction. The ground shakes not because history is broken, but because history is moving. Capitalism presents itself as permanence, yet it survives only through constant disruption. It uproots communities, exhausts labor, destroys traditions, and calls this progress. It creates abundance, then withholds it. It generates wealth on a scale never before seen, then concentrates it into fewer and fewer hands. This is not stability. This is organized instability, carefully managed to protect those who profit from it. The worker is told to be grateful for employment while their labor is stripped of dignity. The poor are told to be patient while their patience is turned into profit. The oppressed are told to wait while history is written without them, and all the while the ruling class proclaims calm, balance and order, because for them the system works. But society is not held together by speeches, laws or illusions. It is held together by labor. Every road, every machine, every harvest, every building, every innovation bears the fingerprint of the working class. Yet those who produce the wealth of society are denied control over it. The worker creates value, but value stands above the worker as an alien force. This is the central contradiction of capitalism. Labor produces everything, yet owns nothing. Stability under such conditions is impossible. A system that rests on exploitation must constantly defend itself against the very people who sustain it. It must divide workers by nation, race, gender, and creed. It must convince them that their enemy is not above them, but beside them. It must turn insecurity into a permanent condition of life, so fear replaces solidarity. Crises are not failures of capitalism, they are its revelations. Economic collapse, unemployment, inflation, debt, and war are not interruptions of the system, they are expressions of it. Capital must expand or perish, and in its expansion it devours human life, natural resources, and social bonds. Each crisis exposes the truth that was always there. The system cannot provide stability because it is built on inequality. The ruling class fears this truth. That is why it clings to the myth of stability with religious devotion. They speak of the economy as though it were a god to be appeased, not a human creation to be transformed. They demand sacrifices from workers while protecting profits. They call resistance irresponsible, protest dangerous, and solidarity unrealistic. Realism, they say, means accepting your place. But history has never advanced through acceptance. It has advanced through struggle. The working class is not a passive victim of history, it is its driving force. When workers recognize their shared conditions, when they see that their exploitation is not individual but collective, consciousness is born. And consciousness is dangerous to those who rule. For once workers understand that the system depends on them, the illusion of stability collapses. You are told you are powerless because you stand alone. This is another lie. Alone, the worker is vulnerable. Together, workers are unstoppable. Every gain ever made, every reduction in working hours, every right, every protection was won not by generosity from above, but by organization from below. Power concedes nothing without pressure. The task before us is not to beg for fairness from an unfair system, but to dismantle the conditions that make exploitation possible. This requires unity, discipline, and clarity of purpose. It requires rejecting the false stability offered by capitalism and embracing the transformative instability of collective action. It requires understanding that freedom cannot exist where labor is commodified and human life is subordinated to profit. A new world will not emerge from patience. It will emerge from struggle guided by reason. The old society carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. As inequality deepens and contradictions sharpen, the choice becomes unavoidable: barbarism or transformation. Workers of the world, do not be lulled by the promise of stability that never arrives. Do not mistake endurance for justice. The future belongs not to those who hoard wealth, but to those who produce it. Organize, unite, and reclaim your power. History is not finished. It is calling you to complete it. They tell you the world is stable. They tell you that the markets, the governments, the institutions that shape your daily life are reliable, predictable, and permanent. They tell you that if you work hard, follow the rules, and endure the cycles of boom and bust, you will find security. But this so-called stability is a mirage, a fragile veneer that hides the deep and persistent contradictions of the system. Capitalism, for all its claims of efficiency, rationality, and fairness, rests upon a foundation of inequality and exploitation that makes true stability impossible. The calm surfaces we observe, the steady growth rates, the rising stock markets, the orderly streets, are illusions maintained by the continual extraction of labour from the working majority. What they call order is nothing but the disciplined suffering of the many so that the few may flourish. Underneath this facade, the machinery of exploitation is ceaseless. Every product, every service, every technological marvel, every building and road, every resource that sustains life is made possible through the labour of workers who remain alienated from the fruits of their own work. They are compelled to sell their labour in exchange for wages, not because it is fair or natural, but because they have no alternative. This systemic coercion produces a society that appears stable only because it suppresses the underlying conflicts that naturally arise between those who produce wealth and those who accumulate it. Capitalism's stability is enforced through power, not justice, through manipulation, not agreement. When workers are divided by social constructs, by nationality, race, gender, or ideology, their capacity to challenge the system diminishes. The illusion of stability is maintained through this fragmentation, convincing the oppressed that their suffering is their own misfortune rather than a product of systemic exploitation. Crises, financial collapses, unemployment surges, famines, wars occur regularly, yet they are framed as accidents, anomalies, or failures of individual decision-making, rather than as the inevitable outcome of a system structured around profit above human need. Each crisis reveals the instability that is ever present beneath the surface, exposing the lie of permanence. Capitalism does not aim to resolve these contradictions. It survives by perpetuating them, by creating cycles of scarcity and surplus, of wealth and deprivation, of hope and despair. The apparent stability is maintained not because the system is sound, but because the labour of millions is coerced into maintaining it, often at the expense of their own health, freedom, and dignity. While the ruling class reassures the public that the system is stable, it simultaneously accumulates immense power and wealth, insulating itself from the instability it produces and profiting from the miseries of others. They call this progress. They call this civilization. They call this order. Yet it is only a thin skin over a body of contradictions, a body that trembles with every economic fluctuation, every social upheaval, every protest that challenges the status quo. Stability under capitalism is never natural. It is enforced. Laws, policing, propaganda, ideology, and cultural norms are all instruments used to maintain the appearance of equilibrium, yet at the root lies a system designed to concentrate power and wealth in the hands of a few, while the majority sustains their privilege. The worker is told to adapt, to tolerate, to be patient, to accept that stability comes only through obedience. But obedience cannot create true order. It can only postpone the inevitable reckoning that arises when labor recognizes its own collective power. Capitalism's promise of security is therefore deceptive. It is a contract that extracts compliance. In exchange for illusion, it trades the real potential of human life for the semblance of predictability. It sacrifices freedom for the comfort of appearances. The markets may seem steady, profits may rise, the economy may expand, yet these are merely the superficial signs of a system that constantly teeters on the brink, a system that survives because workers continue to produce, consume, and obey. The moment they recognize their shared conditions, their collective exploitation, the facade of stability collapses. The illusion is not merely an intellectual construct, it is lived experience. It shapes how people think, act, and perceive their place in society. It discourages questioning, undermines solidarity, and discourages resistance. Yet the very labor that is exploited, the labor that maintains the system, is also the source of its potential undoing. The contradiction between the wealth produced by workers and the poverty imposed upon them is fundamental. Stability is not inherent to the system, it is imposed artificially, temporarily, and violently. Every crisis, every upheaval, every act of resistance exposes the truth. The order we see is provisional, conditional, and maintained by coercion. The worker is the foundation upon which society is built, yet the worker is also the most invisible force in that society, the true creator of all wealth, yet denied its ownership or control. Every commodity, every technological advancement, every building, every field harvested, every machine turned, bears the imprint of human labor. It is labor that transforms raw materials into meaningful objects, that converts nature into civilization, that makes life possible. And yet, despite this fundamental role, the worker exists in a condition of separation from the product of their labor. The value created by the worker is appropriated by others, accumulated into the hands of a class that does not produce but commands, that consumes but does not toil. This separation, this alienation, is not an incidental feature of society, it is its very core. The worker's labor is both the source of life and the instrument of subjugation, for it is through labor that the ruling class consolidates its power, and it is through labor that society functions, while appearing to the exploited as if they are powerless. Capitalism claims that wealth is created by capital, by ownership, by investment, yet in reality capital produces nothing without labor. Machinery, factories, technology, and organization of production are all inert without the hands, minds, and muscles of the working majority. Every innovation, every increase in productivity, every accumulation of profit is the result of labor, yet those who labor are denied the authority over what they produce. This denial is not merely economic, but political and social. The worker does not decide the purpose of their work, the conditions under which it is performed, or the distribution of its fruits. Decisions are made by those who own the means of production, not by those who sustain them. This is the central contradiction of a society built on exploitation. Those who possess the ability to create wealth are subordinated to those who merely claim ownership. Yet it is precisely this labor that is society's true power. While capital relies on authority, coercion, and hierarchy to maintain control, labor carries within it the capacity to reshape society entirely. If workers were to collectively recognize their indispensable role, if they were to organize and assert control over production, they would possess not only economic leverage but social and political authority. The transformation of society is not dependent on the benevolence of those who profit from labor, but on the collective power of those who produce it. Throughout history, every progressive reform, every right secured for workers, every reduction in hours, every guarantee of safety has been achieved through organized labor, not through the goodwill of capitalists. Labour, when united, becomes conscious of its capacity to assert its own interests, to challenge the structures of exploitation, to demand justice and control. Alienation, however, obscures this power. Workers are made to see themselves as isolated, powerless and subordinate. They are divided by ideology, by social constructs, by cultural pressures, by fear. Yet these divisions mask the fundamental truth. Without labour, nothing moves, nothing grows, nothing functions. Society is dependent on labour in every dimension. Every act of daily life, the food on the table, the homes we inhabit, the clothing we wear, the tools we use, is mediated by human labour. The seeming authority of capital rests on the compliance of labour. The wealth of the few exists because of the effort of the many. To understand this is to see that the worker's position is not one of weakness, but of latent strength. Organised labour, conscious labour, united labour can determine the allocation of resources, the direction of production, and the conditions of social life. It can transform scarcity into abundance, oppression into freedom, alienation into community. Labour is not merely a means of survival, it is the instrument through which society can define itself, through which humanity can assert its collective needs over private gain. When workers recognise that their labour is the engine of social life, they can no longer be treated as disposable, replaceable or irrelevant. They become the arbiters of production, the shapers of wealth, the bearers of the potential for social transformation. Every factory, every office, every field, every mine, every place where labour occurs holds within it the potential to overturn the hierarchy imposed by those who claim ownership. The apparent authority of capital is a fragile construct, dependent entirely on the compliance of labour, and when labour acts with consciousness and solidarity, it becomes irresistible. Labour's power is not abstract, it is material, practical and immediate. Every act of production is an assertion of that power, and every collective action by workers multiplies it exponentially. Society cannot exist without labour, and the denial of control over labour is therefore a denial, not of minor privileges, but of the very force that sustains life itself. Understanding labour as power is to understand that the source of social strength lies not in property, not in wealth, not in titles or hierarchy, but in the organised, conscious and collective effort of those who produce the world's wealth. This realisation is the cornerstone of revolutionary potential, for once labour recognises its own indispensability, the structures built upon its subordination cannot stand. Capitalism presents itself as a system of order, growth and rationality, yet beneath its polished surface lies a perpetual instability that no reform can ever eliminate. Crises, financial collapses, recessions, unemployment surges, market crashes, famine and war are not aberrations, mistakes or accidents, they are the inevitable expression of a system built upon exploitation, inequality and the relentless drive for profit. Those who defend capitalism would have you believe that crises are temporary interruptions, unfortunate disruptions in an otherwise stable order. They claim that with better policies, wiser management or greater regulation, such disturbances can be avoided. This is false. Capitalism's inherent contradictions make crises not occasional events but structural necessities. At its core, capitalism relies on the extraction of surplus value from labour. Workers produce more value than they receive in wages, and this surplus is accumulated by capitalists. Yet the more profit is concentrated in fewer hands, the less purchasing power exists among the vast majority who are expected to consume the products they produce. This contradiction between production and consumption generates cycles of overproduction and underconsumption, wealth and scarcity, abundance and deprivation. Crises emerge when these contradictions can no longer be contained. The periodic crashes of financial markets are manifestations of this imbalance, exposing the artificial stability upon which the system rests. Capitalism depends on constant expansion, yet expansion intensifies contradictions. Investment flows are speculative, production grows faster than demand, and debt accumulates both privately and publicly. When the system reaches a point where the accumulated imbalances can no longer be sustained, crisis erupts. It is not a flaw in the machinery of capitalism, it is its very logic coming to the surface. Crises reveal the truth that the stability promised by markets and governments is an illusion. When unemployment rises, when factories close, when hunger spreads, when homes are foreclosed, the lie of permanence is stripped away. People see, often for the first time, that the prosperity they were told existed depends upon the exploitation of others, and that the system's stability is conditional upon their compliance and labour. Crises also expose the social hierarchy embedded within capitalism. When disaster strikes, the burdens fall unevenly. The working majority bears the costs. Wages are cut, jobs are lost, services disappear, and futures are mortgaged. Meanwhile, those who already possess wealth often emerge unscathed or even enriched, as speculation and financial manoeuvres turn calamity into opportunity. The recurring nature of crises is itself a lesson. The system cannot deliver justice, equality, or permanent security because it is organized to benefit a minority at the expense of the majority. Every downturn, every recession, every collapse is a reminder that capitalism thrives on instability while presenting an image of control. These crises are also ideological weapons. They convince workers that scarcity is natural, that hardship is inevitable, that their suffering is a personal failure rather than a product of systemic exploitation. They manufacture consent through fear, ensuring that workers remain divided, obedient, and alienated from their own collective power. Yet crises also contain seeds of revelation and opportunity. They make visible the contradictions that are otherwise hidden beneath the routine operations of the system. When a factory shuts down, when wages are slashed, when markets collapse, the social relations that sustain exploitation become undeniable. Workers begin to see that their labour, not capital, is the true source of wealth. They see that the prosperity of the few is inseparable from the deprivation of the many. They see that stability under capitalism is temporary, imposed and contingent. History demonstrates that crises have often been catalysts for organisation, resistance and social change. The strikes, revolts and movements that arise in times of hardship are not merely reactions to immediate suffering. They are responses to the revelation of systemic injustice. Each crisis challenges the narrative of inevitability, exposing the false promises of reform, and revealing that the structures of power depend not on natural order, but on maintained exploitation. Crises are therefore both destructive and enlightening. They disrupt routine, they undermine illusions, they awaken consciousness. The worker, confronted with the material reality of deprivation and inequality, is compelled to ask why society functions this way, why the fruits of collective labour are concentrated in the hands of a few, and why stability is always conditional upon continued exploitation. Capitalism cannot reconcile these contradictions. Every crisis is inevitable because the system cannot eliminate the conflict between profit and human need, between accumulation and distribution, between labour and wealth. Crises reveal that the system's proclaimed rationality is a cover for coercion, that its stability is imposed through social hierarchies and ideological control, and that the prosperity of the few depends on the compliance and suffering of the many. Understanding crises as inherent, structural and unavoidable illuminates the path to action. It shows that the problems are not accidental, the solutions cannot come from minor reforms, and the power to change the system lies with those who produce its wealth. It is the recognition of this truth that transforms fear into agency, hardship into clarity, and disruption into the potential for collective organization. For the same labor that sustains capitalism also holds the capacity to challenge and ultimately replace it. The recognition of shared oppression is the first step toward liberation, for without understanding the common conditions that bind them, workers remain isolated, fragmented, and powerless. Under capitalism, every worker experiences exploitation differently, yet the underlying mechanism is the same. Labor is commodified, surplus value is extracted, and control over production is denied. This structural reality creates a silent bond among workers, a potential unity obscured by the ideology of individualism, competition, and merit. Capitalism thrives on the illusion that each person is responsible for their own success or failure, that poverty and hardship are consequences of personal inadequacy rather than systemic inequality. The creation of this illusion is deliberate, designed to prevent workers from seeing their shared condition, to divide them along lines of race, gender, nationality, and skill, to turn potential allies into rivals. Collective consciousness emerges when workers pierce this veil of division and recognize that their struggles are not isolated incidents but expressions of a common exploitation. It is the realization that the injustice one experiences is not personal misfortune but the result of systemic dynamics. This awareness transforms suffering from a passive condition into a political fact. When a worker understands that their labor is undervalued, their time commodified, and their efforts appropriated by those who profit from it, they begin to see that their interest aligns with that of all workers. This recognition is revolutionary, not merely in thought, but in its potential for action. Consciousness is the spark that transforms individual grievance. CES into collective demands that converts silent resentment into organized struggle. History demonstrates that when workers achieve this awareness, they develop the capacity to challenge entrenched power structures. Strikes, unions, protests, and revolutions are the material manifestations of collective consciousness. They do not emerge spontaneously, but are the outcome of workers' understanding that their exploitation is systemic, that their strength lies not in isolated effort, but in unity. Without such awareness, attempts at resistance are fragmented, reactive, and ultimately insufficient to challenge the power of capital. Collective consciousness also reshapes how workers understand their own labor. Labor is not simply a means of survival, it is the source of social wealth, the foundation upon which society is built, and the instrument through which systemic change can be achieved. Recognizing the shared value of their work allows workers to see themselves not as replaceable cogs, but as the indispensable force upon which the entire structure of society depends. This understanding breeds confidence, solidarity, and strategic thinking. It shifts the perception of power from the abstract authority of capital to the tangible, material power of labor itself. When workers act collectively, they can negotiate conditions, resist exploitation, and assert control over production. Collective consciousness does not arise automatically. It is cultivated through experience, dialogue, education, and struggle. Workers must communicate, share experiences, and recognize patterns of oppression that extend beyond individual workplaces, industries, or regions. Class struggle is both the process and the product of this awareness, for engagement in collective action reinforces consciousness, while consciousness motivates action. As workers become aware of their shared oppression, they also begin to perceive the broader social structures that sustain inequality. They see that legislation, policing, cultural narratives, and economic institutions are designed to uphold the privileges of those who own the means of production. This understanding transforms anger and frustration into strategy and vision. It allows workers to connect immediate grievances with long-term goals of social transformation, to perceive exploitation not as an isolated misfortune, but as an inherent feature of the system. The development of collective consciousness also challenges the narratives imposed by ruling classes. Ideologies that promote individual competition, consumerism, or nationalism lose their power when workers recognize their shared interests. Solidarity becomes a weapon, unity becomes a strategy, and consciousness becomes the foundation for revolutionary potential. In this state of awareness, workers begin to understand that systemic change is not granted by those who benefit from exploitation, but must be claimed through organized effort. Every strike, every protest, every act of mutual aid is both an expression of and a catalyst for collective consciousness. It strengthens networks, sharpens understanding, and expands the vision of what is possible. Collective consciousness is therefore both intellectual and practical. It is an understanding of structural oppression and the recognition of material capacity for change. It transforms isolated suffering into collective agency, and passive endurance into strategic resistance. When workers act with this awareness, the imbalance of power that has seemed permanent is revealed to be contingent, dependent entirely upon the continued subordination of labour. Awareness of shared oppression turns labour into leverage, frustration into organisation, and the recognition of injustice into revolutionary potential. It is through this consciousness that workers begin to see themselves as the historical subjects capable of reshaping society, asserting control over production, redistributing wealth, and transforming conditions that have long been presented as immutable. This consciousness is the root of revolutionary possibility, for without it, no movement can achieve coherence, strategy, or transformative force. Patience has long been presented to the working class as a virtue, as the proper response to hardship, as the expected method of survival under capitalism. We are told to endure low wages, long hours, unsafe conditions, and systemic inequality with quiet resignation, that reform will come gradually, that stability is the reward for compliance. Yet this patience is not neutral, it is a tool of control. By encouraging the oppressed to wait, to hope, to trust in the benevolence of those who profit from their labour, the ruling class maintains its dominance while delaying the inevitable challenge to its authority. Transformation is never the result of patience, for the system is designed to extract endurance and convert it into profit, to make suffering bearable only insofar as it does not threaten accumulation. The world does not change because the oppressed wait politely for change. It changes because those who produce the wealth of society recognize their collective power and act upon it. Organization is the first and indispensable step toward transformation. Workers, once aware of their shared conditions and collective interests, must unite in structures that allow their power to be expressed effectively. These structures, unions, councils, associations, and movements, provide channels through which grievances become demands and demands become actions. Without organization, individual efforts are scattered, isolated, and easily suppressed. The scattered anger of the many is insufficient. It must be coordinated, disciplined, and directed toward concrete objectives that challenge the mechanisms of exploitation. Unity strengthens this organization, for the ruling class thrives on division. By dividing workers along lines of race, gender, nationality, and ideology, the system transforms potential allies into perceived rivals, ensuring that their collective strength remains latent. Overcoming these divisions is a political task as much as a social one, requiring recognition of shared interests and mutual dependency. Unity is the multiplier of power, the bridge from individual frustration to collective action. Struggle, is the active expression of organized unity. It is not passive negotiation or polite petitioning, but deliberate, sustained, and often confrontational effort to reclaim control over labor, resources, and society itself. Struggle takes many forms: strikes, protests, boycotts, civil disobedience, and political engagement. Each action asserts that the demands of the working majority cannot be ignored, that the apparent permanence of wealth and power is contingent upon the continued subjugation of labor. Struggle is also educational. Through participation in collective action, workers learn the mechanics of power, the strategies of resistance, and the realities of systemic oppression. It is in struggle that theory meets practice, where consciousness translates into tangible challenge, and where the illusion of inevitability imposed by capital is shattered. Waiting, on the other hand, perpetuates dependency and reinforces submission. The promises of gradual improvement under capitalism are always delayed, always partial, and always insufficient. History demonstrates that rights and protections are rarely given freely. They are seized through organized effort, gained through confrontation, and solidified through solidarity. Transformation is not granted by patience, by appeals to morality, or by faith in gradual reform. It is achieved when the working majority acts collectively, strategically, and persistently. Organization, unity, and struggle convert the latent potential of labor into tangible force, capable of reshaping economic and social structures. Each act of resistance weakens the perceived invulnerability of the ruling class, exposing the contingent nature of their control and revealing that power exists only because the workers allow it to persist. Action is not merely reactive, it is also visionary. It embodies the capacity to imagine a society in which labor is valued, wealth is equitably distributed, and oppression is dismantled. Through organized struggle, the working class can assert this vision, transforming abstract ideals into material reality. Every movement that has reshaped society, every reduction in working hour, every guarantee of rights, every expansion of political representation was not the result of patient waiting, but of collective action that challenged the status quo directly. The patience demanded by capitalism is a mirage, a distraction from the true means of change, which lies in concerted effort. Workers hold within their collective labor the power to disrupt production, to demand justice, and to restructure social relations in a manner that reflects their interests rather than the interests of capital. Action over patience emphasizes that liberation is not deferred but claimed, that justice is not requested but enacted, and that the authority of the ruling class is only as strong as the compliance of those who labor under it. To act is to reject the fatalism imposed by those who benefit from exploitation, to assert agency where resignation has been prescribed, and to demonstrate that the stability of the status quo is artificial, fragile, and contingent. Organization provides the structure, unity provides the strength, and struggle provides the mechanism through which the working majority transforms the conditions of their existence, turning collective awareness and dissatisfaction into real, material, and lasting change. The world we inhabit is neither stable nor just. It is a construct maintained by exploitation, inequality, and the illusions propagated by those who profit from the labor of others. Capitalism thrives on masking its contradictions, presenting temporary order while crises and suffering reveal its inherent instability. Yet within this exploitation lies the source of true power, the labor of the working majority, the hands and minds that create our wealth yet are denied its control. When workers recognize their shared oppression, develop collective consciousness, and organize their strength, the foundations of the system tremble. Transformation is not granted through patience or submission, but through unity, struggle, and deliberate action that challenges the mechanisms of domination. History demonstrates that progress has always emerged from the collective efforts of the oppressed, from their refusal to accept the conditions imposed upon them, and from their capacity to turn consciousness into organized power. The illusion of stability cannot withstand the awakening of the laboring majority, and the path toward justice lies in recognizing that the very force that sustains society, the worker, is the same force capable of reshaping it. The future is not inevitable. It is made by those who act, who organize, who unite, and who struggle to reclaim their rights, their labor, and their collective destiny.